Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's program. As you can see, we've got a very full room, so clearly this is an issue and a topic that is of great interest to our members here in the room, to people who might be watching this recording later, and we've got a couple people joining us on Zoom, so welcome from wherever you are. We're glad to have you with us today. Just a little bit of background before I introduce our speaker. Nearly 20 years ago, the League of Women Voters identified immigration as a social issue we might impact through education and advocacy. After study and consensus, the first official position on immigration was adopted in 2008, and immigration has been a part of the annual convention agenda since that time. In 2024, our delegates passed a resolution reaffirming the League's position calling for fair and humane immigration reform. In brief, our position statement reads, the League of Women Voters believes that immigration policies should promote reunification of immediate families, meet the economic, business, and employment needs of the United States, and be responsive to those facing political persecution or humanitarian crises. In Wisconsin, immigration arrests more than doubled from September 2023 through July 2025. An analysis of ICE data by the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel showed that the sharpest increase in arrests has been of people without any criminal record whatsoever. Their only known offense is a civil immigration violation. The League of Women Voters believes this moment is not just about immigrants. If the government can detain one group of people without transparency or accountability, it erodes democracy for all of us. So that's a little bit of background on today's topic, where our guest speaker is going to be sharing some perspective on immigration issues in our area and how members of our communities are being affected. Ben Sonsalla is a longtime immigrant advocate for Catholic Charities here in La Crosse, and we are so glad to welcome him here today. Come on up, Ben. Just so you know, we will have a Q&A afterwards, and for members who've been involved in this issue, feel free to stand up and speak a little bit to your background and experience as well. So thanks, Ben.
All right, thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you for having me. First off, introductions. My name is Ben Sonsalla. I have been working at Catholic Charities since 2009. I've been working in the immigration department since 2011. I am currently the program coordinator, and I have been doing that for about 4 years. So first, to start off, what Catholic Charities Immigration Service does. So Catholic Charities Immigration Program, we are recognized by the Department of Justice. So they give us the ability to practice family-based immigration law. Now, they started this because they saw that there was a large gap in service for people seeking legal representation in the immigration world, because it's usually typically a lower socioeconomic class. So they created this program, which allows people without law degrees to be able to practice just family-based immigration. So currently, we provide representation and legal assistance in preparation of forms, and then we will appear with you if there is a need. So we focus on family-based and humanitarian-based immigration services. And we'll get into kind of what those different types of immigration are eventually. But right now we're just gonna go kind of with the overview of us, which is our office consists of myself and one other DOJ accredited representative. And then we also have our assistant Jay, who is over there helping me out, who will also be applying for her accreditation very shortly. We also have a contract attorney. His name is Chuck Behrens. A lot of you probably know who that is. He consults with us for about 6 hours a week. Oh, sure. Absolutely. So apologies, I'm used to speaking in churches and in community organizations where I just have to talk really loud. So yes, so that is our department, and we serve 19 counties in Wisconsin. So I'm not gonna go through and list all the counties, but it's basically the western midsection of Wisconsin. So the different types of immigration law are kind of broken down as such. So there's family-based immigration, which is when you are seeking a benefit for yourself or a family member. This could be a wide range of benefits from permanent residence, employment authorization to citizenship. Additionally, there's employment-based immigration. We do not practice that because by policy that would be for profit, so we are not allowed to do that. There is also a wide category of students that is completely usually handled by universities. You apply through their system. They have special individuals who are designated at the school to handle international students. And then humanitarian immigration is the process of seeking refugee admission and permission to enter the country due to urgent humanitarian needs, often stemming from crises like war, famine, natural disaster. So some recent examples of that would kind of be like the Ukrainians who have fled in on the U4U program. Additionally, the Afghan arrivals from a few years ago. So what is an immigration benefit? An immigration benefit is a legal entitlement that allows a non-citizen to reside, work, or seek protection within the country. So basically, we sum that up by just calling it a benefit. So humanitarian protections, this is for asylees, refugees, or temporary protected status. So you most commonly will see those things like from the Afghan arrivals, they were able to apply for temporary protected status if they did not have some other means to get a legal benefit, such as permanent resident or a special immigrant visa. It offers temporary protection from deportation. That is a designation that is renewed yearly by the government. Now, it is not always renewed, as you've probably seen in the news. Several of these TPS designations have been terminated. So that just means these people are now here and effectively have no way to gain work authorization or move further on in their immigration journey. So there's temporary or non-immigrant visas. This would be an example of like your student visa or your seasonal workers, things like that, or coming to visit on such a thing as a B2 visa. So yes, tourism, work, study. So now some types of benefit would be employment authorization. Now this one is key in the most that we see probably coming through our office. So people, when they come to the United States, they want to have the ability to work and they want to be able to do it legally. And this is a benefit for everybody involved if they are able to get this employment authorization. They are better able to provide for their family members, they are able to pay taxes and contribute, and able to live without the fear of being picked up at work. Now we move on to adjustment status and legal permanent resident status. So adjustment of status is the process of changing from one of those visas to legal permanent resident status. So what is legal permanent resident status? That gives you the benefits to work and live in the United States indefinitely. Now they give you a card that is good for 10 years, but if you do not renew that card, that does not mean that you lose your permanent resident status. That simply means that you can't do anything because you don't have a card that is valid. But the only way your permanent resident status can be removed is if it is taken away. So how can it be taken away? Things like if you committed fraud to get that benefit, or if you commit some form of crime where they deem it that it is necessary to remove that residence. So this is also commonly known as the green card, which I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with that. So green card is more of the, I guess you'd say, slang term, when the actual is called the legal permanent resident status. So different ways to get legal permanent resident status. There's quite a wide variety. So if you are to come based on an employment visa, certain types of them, you are able to register for permanent residence after you've met a required amount of time at that employer. We also don't do employment, so I know there are other ways, but I'm not very knowledgeable about those. So I'll move on to the family category. So if you have a family member who is residing outside of the United States, you can apply for them. They do have different preference categories, but if you are a US citizen, you can apply for what's known as immediate relative. So that would be a parent, spouse, or children. So when you're an immediate relative, it means you are automatically ready to have a visa available to you. Now, there are other things that are called preference categories. They are incredibly confusing, so I'm not going to go into those. But basically, you would fall into a certain preference category as, say, you were the brother of a U.S. citizen over 21 years old. And in some of those categories, the wait time can be estimated to be 90 years. So you could apply for your brother right now, and he may not be able to immigrate until 90 years from now. Now, naturalization, I believe everybody probably knows what that is, but naturalization is a legal process by which a foreign national becomes a U.S. citizen. So, to get your U.S. citizenship, you need to meet specific criteria. That criteria involves being here for a certain amount of time. Now, if you have adjusted based as an immediate relative, there are two different standards. The first being if you came through marriage, you are eligible to apply for naturalization after 3 years. The other is if you came as, say, a child or something, then it would be 5 years. So those are important timeframes to note. Additionally, when you do naturalization, there is a test, and we will get into it later, but they have just revamped that test and made it slightly longer. What are the benefits of naturalization? So with naturalization comes every right that you get with being a citizen. You have the right to vote. You have the right to receive government benefits. You have protection from deportation. Now, naturalization can be taken away, but that is only if they found that it was achieved through fraud. So if you lied to get naturalization, that is usually the only time they could take it away. Now, the situation in this current political climate is a little bit more dynamic, and they are looking for any loopholes they can at this current moment to be able to take these benefits away. So with that, you also get federal employment opportunities, citizenship for your children. So if you meet a certain age criteria, your children will automatically derive that citizenship from you. So if you were residing with that parent in the United States and you are underneath the age of 18, you automatically derive citizenship. Immigration, however, is what we call a form-based driven of law. There is a form for everything. There is a fee for everything. So even though your child has derived citizenship, if you were to just have them go about their day and not get a certificate, they're going to have problems. Nobody is going to acknowledge that they are a citizen until they get that sheet of paper, which you have to pay roughly $1,000 for. And the other thing to note is that USCIS is one of the only government institutions that is run completely off of fees it collects. So all of these things do go to fund USCIS. So they are unique in that way. You can also have dual citizenship. There is an ongoing list at the Department of State that will list countries you are allowed to have dual citizenship with. Not all countries allow that. You can run for public office with the exception of president or vice president. So a couple other statuses I want to touch on is, does everyone in here know what deferred action for childhood arrivals is? I could go over it briefly. In 2012, President Obama released an executive order stating that if you met certain criteria and you had been brought here as a minor, you can get what's known as deferred action. Now, what deferred action means is exactly what it says. The government is deferring to take action on you. So basically, they're going to give you employment authorization and they're not going to deport you as long as you do not commit crimes or anything else they deem unnecessary. So, it requires that the individual be under the age of 16 when they arrived in the U.S. They have to have been in the country, residing here since June 15th, 2007. The individual must be enrolled in school or have a high school diploma or equivalent or be a veteran. And they must maintain their eligibility and renew every 2 years. Now, the interesting thing about deferred action is that it's still ongoing. Obviously, they've tried to remove it multiple times. Currently, the current ruling is that DACA may go on and continue as it has been, and they will accept new applicants, which they have not done for, I think, 6 or 7 years, with the exception of Texas. Texas was the only state that was able to prove harm, so while they will recognize the deferred status, they will not give you work authorization. So that was a very interesting ruling. But the good news is that all of those who have since come into the eligibility for DACA are now able to apply again. There was a brief window when it opened up 5 or 6 years ago that we submitted, I think, 4 or 5 applications. They took the applications, they took the money, and they have sat there collecting dust ever since. So now they should continue to process those applications. Now, some of the other statuses I want to talk about, I feel like are very important. It's very good to get the word out about these things. So they found that in immigrant communities, crime was going widely unreported for obvious reasons. You don't want the police coming. You don't want to put yourself in jeopardy. So one of the good things they've ever done is that they instituted what's known as the U visa. It is for victims of qualifying crimes. What we do see most in our office is domestic violence. So if you are the victim of a crime, and it's a qualifying crime such as domestic violence and some other things, and you cooperate with law enforcement, you can file for this U visa. Now, this was extremely beneficial when it was instituted. However, I do not believe they thought it through or believed that they would get as much turnout as they did. So with the U visa, they instituted a 10,000 cap every year. They will give out 10,000 visas under the U visa category. Obviously, there are more than 10,000 applicants every year. That line has continued to grow and grow. The best estimate we have right now is between 10 and 20 years until your application is approved. So while you have been cooperative with law enforcement, been a good citizen yourself, the wait time is extreme and it is going to continue to grow because more people are going to apply. Additionally, we have the VAWA, so the Violence Against Women Act. So this is also most commonly seen with domestic violence as well, but the difference is when the spouse is a US citizen, you are able to apply under the VAWA Act. What this does is that this gives you that immediate relative status. You can also do it if the spouse is a permanent resident, but then you get a priority date. So very similar to the U visa, but much, much quicker. I believe it's about a 2-year processing time for this. The T visa is for trafficking. So it enables certain victims of severe forms of trafficking in persons to remain in the United States for an initial period of up to 4 years if they complied with any reasonable request for assistance from law enforcement in the detection, investigation, or persecution of human trafficking. Now, this has become much more obtainable recently. They've kind of set new policy guidelines on this. You used to have to prove the trafficking, and now you may merely have to get a reasonable stance on the trafficking to show that you could possibly have been trafficked. Because trafficking is incredibly hard to prove. So a lot of this involves such things as labor trafficking. So they'll promise someone a job. They'll come to this place. Well, they'll garnish their wages for this, that, or the other thing. Or they'll close up shop and they'll move on and not pay them. So that is a form of trafficking, but once again, extremely hard to prove. So that's just a brief, quick overview of some different statuses and different programs that are in the United States. If you have any questions about that after, I will be happy to answer them as best I can. But we're going to kind of move on to status of immigration in the United States. So the immigrant population, as far as I believe this was August, is 51.9 million immigrants lived in the US. So 15.4% of all residents were immigrants. I mean, that is down slightly from 15.8, but if you look at it, 19% of the US labor force were immigrants. So 19% of the labor force in the US. That's a significant number. If all of them were to disappear tomorrow, we're gonna have some serious problems. So with that, the new administration has sent out some very recent policy changes and some very impactful policy changes. So They have revised the naturalization test. It has gone from 100 civics questions, which were randomly selected by algorithm. You had to get 6 of those 10 questions correct. Now they are going to 128 questions, and they're asking 20 questions and needed to get 12 correct. So still about a 60%, but that's a larger pool that people will need to know. Now, some notable exceptions to this are that there is age and permanent residency standards where you can get a reduced test. So some people who have been permanent residents for 50 years for fear of taking the test and for fear of taking the English test, well, you can actually get a set of reduced questions. So I am not sure what the reduced questions are going to be with these new revisions, but historically, instead of 100 questions, they narrowed it down to 20. So you only had to study 20 questions in order to pass this test. And they would actually waive the English requirement at that point. So along with this has come stricter good moral character evaluations. Now, traditionally, when you apply for naturalization, you basically had to show a lack of criminal history. So that goes to show that functionally you are a good person, you fit into US society, you don't have any crimes committed against you. Now they are going to start analyzing good moral character for a totality of the circumstances. Now that's kind of a classy way of saying we're gonna want more evidence. We want people to attest. We wanna see your participation in your community. Have you been volunteering? Have you been helping? Do you pay your taxes? So while all of that stuff doesn't sound that bad on the face, it's kind of a pattern we've seen of where they're adding additional steps, additional requirements to everything. Basically adding more hoops to jump through to get the benefit. And along with that comes the enhanced discretionary authority. It gives the officers a much broader ability to discretionarily decide the outcomes of cases. So a good way to explain this is in naturalization. So if they feel for some reason that you have not contributed to your community enough, that, well, you need to do more. So we're gonna deny your case and have you come back a different time. Or things like DACA. DACA is completely discretionary. So in those cases, they could start really narrowing their scope of things that they find acceptable or unacceptable in approving those applications. And most recently, and I will actually add one that we just found this morning, which is interesting, but the termination of automatic EAD extensions. So EAD stands for Employment Authorization Document. So with increased processing times throughout the years, they have included what was an automatic extension to an employment document. So if you were applying in a certain category, say for adjustment of status, they were behind, they decided to give you a sheet of paper that said your employment authorization is extended for 500 some days. And in some cases, these employments can take up to like 2 or 3 years. So this was a huge benefit to everybody. It also took some of the burden off of USCIS to get these cards produced and things like that that were forcing them to be behind. They just recently, as of October 30th, have ended that. So there is no longer an employment authorization extension. Even if you file timely, if you do not have your employment authorization by then, you are just out of luck. You are unable to continue working. Now, in a lot of cases, that will be more dependent on the employer, but most places these days are leaning to be safe and are letting the employees go. A lot of them have been great in saying, you know, when you get your employment authorization, come on back, we'll rehire you. But if that takes a year, my guess is that the employer is probably going to move on. So, also, as I'm sure everybody is very aware, there have been quite the flurry of executive orders released recently. So I've highlighted just a few that are impactful. There are some more. Oh, let me revisit the policy changes because we just found out this morning. They are now instituting a policy where they are looking at disqualifying individuals from visas for being obese. So with that, they are claiming that they will not be able to afford the American healthcare system with things like high blood pressure, sleep apnea, things like that. Now, I don't know a whole lot about this because I just heard about it this morning. That's a new one even for me. I did not see that one coming. So, but like I said, they're looking for avenues everywhere they can to disqualify people. Okay, so to the executive orders, one I didn't put on here, but I wanted to mention is everybody's heard of the gold card visa thing. So basically what we're telling a lot of people at this point seems to that the more money you have, the more likely you're able to get in here, which seems awfully unfair. And it kind of steers away from what I view as American values. I did not include that one on here because I just think it's ridiculous. First off, and because this has just been updated, the executive order realigning the United States Refugee Admission Program. Basically what happened is that they just put a halt on any refugee or asylee admissions. Well, not asylee, but refugee. So what they're asking for at this is increased vetting. So all these people are coming from all of these places, and they're saying, well, we aren't checking them well enough, so we're going to put a hold on this and do that. They just updated this rule. I have in my notes here. So as of 10/31/25, they put a cap of 2,500. Only 2,500 refugees are allowed, which I believe the previous cap was somewhere around 10,000. So with this comes the increased vetting, making, once again, for longer wait times, things like that. Now, the second one is the executive order protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship. So this executive order alters the longstanding policy of birthright citizenship in the U.S. Constitution, the 14th Amendment. The order denies birthright citizenship to, number one, two undocumented parents. So traditionally, if you arrive in the United States and you have a child, that child derives citizenship because they are in the United States. This executive order looks to strip that. Two, a mother unlawfully present and a father who is not a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident at the time of the child's birth. So even if you accompanied your husband into the United States and you gave birth, if he is not a permanent resident or a citizen, that child will not derive citizenship at that point. And three, a mother unlawfully present and a father who is not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident at the time, oh, I'm sorry, wrong line, with temporary legal status, or a father who is not a U.S. citizen or permanent resident at the child's birth. So who does that affect? Once again, we go back to the DACA children. I call them kids, they're not kids anymore. I've known most of them for over 10 years. They are growing up, they have families, they have businesses. If they were to marry an undocumented person, or if they were to marry another DACA recipient, their children would not derive citizenship under this order. So the policy took effect 30 days after it was issued on February 20th, 2025. Obviously, there have been injunctions to this. Multiple agencies have sued that this is unconstitutional and is currently still being figured out. Next, we have the executive order securing our borders. This order authorizes the construction of a border wall and barriers along the U.S.-Mexico border, restarts the migration protection protocols or remain in Mexico program, and ends the CBP app. So the CBP app during the Biden administration was you could identify that you were coming to the border to apply for asylum. You could set an appointment, you could do it through your phone. They have since taken that app down, and I believe they've actually replaced it with a reporting app. So you are able to report on people. But the Remain in Mexico policy is that you can no longer come into the United States and then apply for asylum after you are here. You need to apply at the border. Now, that causes a multitude of problems and humanitarian conditions. So you've seen that they have all these camps outside the US border, people just waiting for these things. There's rampant crime happening in those camps. There's forms of trafficking happening in those camps, but we are basically saying you can't come in until we say you can come in. It also ended the humanitarian parole programs for the Cubans, Haitian, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. This is important because recently during the Biden administration, they were able to have applications filled out for them if they were from one of these designated countries. If they could find a sponsor, they were able to come to the US. They have since ended that program and stripped those people that are here of that protection. So they no longer have valid work authorization. Well, the good news is that they do have a legal entry, so they are able to apply for a different benefit if they so qualify for it, based off of a family member through marriage or something like that. Then we have the executive order protecting American people against invasion. So, this repeals the enforcement priorities of the Biden administration, which prioritize violent criminal aliens and replace them with all undocumented immigrants as priorities, including those who committed illegal entry, have undocumented presence, or have final orders of removal. The order also expands expedited removal. Now, this is the important one. So expedited removal traditionally was if you had been in the country for, I think, it's 2 years now. Yeah, it's 2 years now. 2 weeks. So if you had been in the country for less than 2 weeks and were within 100 miles of the border, you qualified for expedited removal, which means if they found you, you didn't have documentation, they could just take you across the border. They have now changed that. There is no longer a distance requirement. And if you cannot prove that you have been here for 2 years, you qualify for expedited removal. So that's quite the change. So one of the things that we've been telling people, if they are here and fall under that circumstance, is to carry documentation with you that shows you've been here for 2 years. So what that documentation can include, we get any form of IDs of the school, mortgage agreements, things like that. Basically anything that you can bring with you to prove that you have been here for over 2 years. So this also carries increased penalties for anyone who facilitates the presence of anyone who is undocumented. Now that is less clear, so I guess what would be the definition of facilitating? Does that extend to family members? I don't know. I'm assuming it does. So it also is going after sanctuary jurisdictions. So with that rule, they are implementing that they do not receive federal funding if they are a sanctuary city. Now I know this is pretty well known, but they are targeting at this point those sanctuary cities mostly. There are other cities where they have gone, but mostly the sanctuary cities are the ones that are seeing, I feel like, increased enforcement. And lastly, the executive order protecting the United States from foreign terrorists and other national security and public threats. So this order is to increase the vetting procedures for foreign nationals, and within 60 days issue a report on countries that have insufficient vetting procedures, including Muslim majority countries. It sets the stage for increased vetting procedures and imposition of partial or total travel bans for certain countries, without focusing solely on Muslim majority nations. So why I wanted to bring this one up is because I believe the Afghan travel ban, does everybody know that there is a travel ban from Afghanistan? So this directly affects that. We have a lot of families that have come that were evacuated. Not all of them were able to take their children and their relatives. I currently have one client who had to leave his 2 oldest children. His daughter is finally eligible to get a visa, but she can't because there's a travel ban. If she were to go to that interview, they would deny that visa and she would have to start all over again, and now she's too old. So, while maybe you think that increased vetting is great, at the same time, we brought a lot of these people here, and now we're keeping their families separate. So the justification for the travel ban was the Taliban control, obviously, inadequate vetting, like I said. So they're claiming that the vetting from Afghanistan was inadequate. Well, when you're doing a large evacuation of people, you're not gonna have a lot of time for vetting. So we've also had instances where people were just basically said, here, take the children. So they gave them to relatives who were getting on there. And now those children are here and need to figure out their statuses without their parents. Visa overstay rates. The administration cited high rates of visa overstays for Afghan nationals on B1, B2 tourist visas. That is not, while they are Afghans, that is not the category that we are working with right now. We are working with the ones that were brought here by the US government and are now suffering because of policy changes. So there are more executive orders regarding immigration. These are just a few to go over. I wasn't going to go over them all just to save time. If you do have any questions about them, please let me know and I will do my best to answer. So now we're going to look at a little bit of enforcement and what we're seeing. First, I want to address the big, beautiful bill. Everybody's heard of that, obviously, I'm sure. In that, they were given a significant amount of money for immigration enforcement. So while we haven't seen it yet, you are going to start seeing more ICE officers and other law enforcement regarding this. As Chuck put it, they can't take a water can and sprinkle it in the ground and make new ICE officers, but now they definitely have the money to train them, and they will be coming. So with that also comes expanded detention. So with the big, beautiful bill, they wanted to expand the amount of detention that they can do to have 100,000 people daily. So 100,000 immigrant violators daily. And then annually, they would like to see 1 million removals. So every year they want to try to remove 1 million people, and that's what all of this funding in the bill is going for. So what we're seeing enforcement nationwide is primarily in larger urban areas. That is still holding true. You see that in Los Angeles, they want to go into Chicago, they've been in Chicago, in large urban areas. There is increase in workplace raids, and with that, a lot of times they will tell you, no, it is targeted. Well, that may be the case when they go there. They may have a warrant for a specific person, and they're coming to get that person. But there are other people there which they will call incidentals. So they will check them in their work authorizations or their documents, and they will take them if they cannot prove that they have some form of a status. There's an increase in neighborhood sweeps. That you're not seeing as much, but it is happening. So they are going through neighborhoods, they are stopping people, they are asking them for any kind of identification. I know there's a lot of internet videos out there, TikToks, things like that. Those are not always the most reliable, but they do have some out there that you can see. Detaining individuals at courthouses. Now, this does go to what they are purporting to do. So they are saying that they are coming after criminals. So they are keeping their eyes on the dockets, and they are coming and showing up and taking people after court, especially if they are found guilty. And you've also seen this where people have tried to impede. The judge from Milwaukee had been arrested for allowing the person to leave out the back door. And then they also have people who are being detained after arrest by law enforcement. So that meaning that law enforcement picks somebody up for an alleged crime, they alert ICE, ICE comes and takes them, they don't get a trial or anything, they just get taken to a detention facility. Now, update on enforcement locally. So this is what we are seeing primarily in our area right now. So what we are seeing is that it is still primarily targeted. We have 3 instances where we know that ICE was involved. 1, the person was found guilty. They were taken outside of court after the proceedings were over. Another, they made a targeted stop, and I believe it was Homan. They had a warrant for 1 individual person. They stopped that car. There were other individuals in the car with them. They did just take that person and left. That one is confirmed. And then we have another gentleman who, during a celebration in Arcadia, committed violent assault. He was taken from the jail. Or was he taken from court? I think he was taken from jail. Or he was arraigned in court and then he was taken after that. So what we are seeing locally still is that it is targeted. Now the question is it going to remain that way? I don't foresee that. Eventually they are going to sweep through the urban areas. They have a lot of money. Eventually we're going to start seeing increased enforcement in the more rural areas in here. We also have had Notice that they've been to Ashley Furniture probably 5 or 6 times. We have no confirmation that they have actually been there. So there is a lot of misinformation going around and ICE sightings that are not accurate. We have not seen any large-scale raids or sweeps here, not yet. Once again, once they get done with the bigger urban areas, they're gonna focus on basically, they're gonna go from the top to the more populated, less populated rural. I mean, could they one day be coming to check on farm workers? It is possible. But the good news is for right now, we are seeing primarily just targeted. So now on to the Know Your Rights section. So before I get into these slides, we do Know Your Rights presentations, and these slides are borrowed from that. So they're more geared towards individuals who need to know their rights, but they still apply to this so that you can know and you can inform others when you see them. So you have the right to remain silent, which is something I would highly suggest in that if a person is approached by ICE, they do not have to tell them anything. That does not mean do not cooperate with them. That does not mean run away, but you do not have to talk to them. You have the right to deny anyone entry into your home or vehicle without a proper search warrant. It needs your exact name, title, date, and location. So that is per the Fourth Amendment. So with that, there are 2 different types of warrants. There's an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. So it is important to know the difference because a judicial warrant will have a judge's name and jurisdiction and signature on it. You have the right to not open your door to law enforcement for entry or search. Instead, if they have an accurate and signed judicial warrant, they can slide it under the door or hold it up to a window. So that is the advice we have given people, and it'll come up in a later slide too, employment or church. If they show up and they do have a warrant, send out the person that the warrant is for. Nobody else has to go out, nobody else has to talk to them if that warrant is for one specific person. You have the right to speak to a lawyer and to make a phone call. We highly recommend in this instance that you get a lawyer that specializes in removal and deportation. Unfortunately, we do not do that. Our accreditation only covers family-based immigration, and deportation is not in that. You also, let's see. You have the right to speak to an attorney before signing anything or show any documents. Once again, I highly recommend that. You want someone who understands the language and is able to properly advise you on what you would be signing. So don't sign anything without seeing an attorney. You have the right to not show any documents describing your citizenship status, even if law enforcement asks to see papers. So technically, you do not have to show them anything. So they come up and they say, I want proof of citizenship. You do not actually have to show them that. You may want to, you may not want to, depending on the circumstances. Both citizens and non-citizens are guaranteed these rights under the Constitution. So that goes for everybody. It does not matter what your immigration status is. You are still protected by these amendments. So our recommendations. Oops, went too far. So inform family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers that you have the right to remain silent, especially concerning anyone's immigration status. So if they ask, hey, is your dad a U.S. citizen? You don't have to say yes. Try to remain calm if ICE approaches you. Once again, don't run because then that can give them probable cause to detain you. Keep copies of documents on your person at all times that prove your residence presence here in the U.S. for the past 2 years. So physically and electronically. These documents would be valid work permits, green cards, or driver's licenses. Do not keep any documents on you that identify your immigration status or country of origin. So one of the things it says when you have a permanent resident card is you need to carry that with you at all times. We, for the past 10 years, have advised not to do that because the thing is very expensive to replace if it's lost or stolen. That has kind of changed. Now I am encouraging people to carry that permanent resident card with them just in case, or at least a copy of it. The same thing with your naturalization certificate. And once again, with the expedited removal, you're going to want to carry things that can demonstrate that you have been here longer than 2 years if you have. So, because the last thing you want is for them to put you on a plane and then just get you out of here. So proof of residence for a minimum of 2 years. We already touched on that for expedited removal. Keep a copy of Know Your Rights card with you. So we do have a box of that if anybody is interested of Know Your Rights cards. So these are things that can be given to any individual and they can be shown to law enforcement, advising them that they know their rights. Do not open the door for ICE or law enforcement unless they have a signed, dated, and correct judicial warrant. So it's very important that if you see a warrant, you review it and make sure that it is accurate. And once again, just to reiterate, if it is for one specific person, send that person out. Nobody else has to go with them. So research and make note of legal service providers in your area. Keep this contact information with you at all times. So in our area, there is us, there's Chuck Behrens here in La Crosse who also does family-based immigration. He does not do removal either. There is Steve Laxton in Sparta. And then other than that, you're gonna have to go to some larger urban areas to find people who do removal defense. Once again, there's not a lot of us that do this. Know how to identify the difference between a signed judicial warrant and the warrants that may not hold the same judicial authority. So an administrative warrant will be a lot more vague. And that does not allow you access to a person's home or car. And then this is just an example of what a judicial warrant looks like. So I know this is hard to read, but it'll have the current address, specific person that they are looking for. I can't even read that. Is it actually signed by a judge? So they will try to play games. They will have the warrant folded. They will do other things to try and get you to come out. So make sure you always see the warrant first. So at employees and businesses, I'm gonna kind of gloss over these quickly because we're running out of time. Employees and businesses, you put up signs that clearly designate private areas. So there's an expectation of privacy in a lot of places. In your home is the highest expectation of privacy. Then you also have expectation of privacy in your car. And then at certain businesses. So, but you can negate some of these by having common areas. You can also have areas marked off that are private, in which case they would need a warrant to go into those areas. So this is especially important for schools and things like that. So at like a church, while the main church hall may be open to the public, certain areas like in the back or in the kitchen, you can mark as private. Communicate with your employees that you have the right to remain silent. Any law enforcement agent that may show up to the business. Do not allow ICE or law enforcement to wander the public sector. Make sure someone is with them. Make sure somebody is guarding them. Once again, this is more geared towards actual individuals who would be in this circumstance, but these are good things to impart on others. If you have a judicial warrant, have an office manager confirm its validity, in which case the employers may have to allow them only in the areas designated by the warrant. So if the warrant does not specify the entire business, you can keep them out of those private areas. So once again, churches and schools. So ICE's enforcement action power is limited by the Fourth Amendment. This still applies to schools, churches, and hospitals. Communicate with your congregation, staff, and students that should law enforcement ever come to the building, you have the right to remain silent and they should deny them entry without a judicial warrant. Schools should already be able to limit access in the fact that they are places of learning and are able to restrict access to the building while school is in operation. Churches can be considered more public. The institutions can hold and should put signs up designating private areas with which ICE would need a judicial warrant to access. These spaces can include a church hall, basement, kitchen, classrooms, etc. It is also advisable to have an officiant keep watch to possibly alert the church should law enforcement arrive and to meet them at the door and deny entry without the proper paperwork. Now, I think everybody's calmed a little bit on this, but at the beginning, they were doing this practice. They were having individuals who were watching outside of Spanish masses at churches in case ICE were to show up. So some preparation that you can do for families, proactive preparation, would be to update all emergency contact information. from the kid's school. Make sure your children know who that contact is. Communicate with your family and children so everyone has an age-appropriate but clear understanding of the ongoing situation and what to do should they come to the home or school or work and find that their guardian family member has disappeared. I personally don't know how I would have that conversation with my children if I could possibly one day just be taken. So, create an easy-to-access list of emergency contacts and their phone numbers, a file of copies of important documents so they can be accessed, information detailing possible health conditions, medications, or allergies of the children, instructions on how to locate a person if they are detained by ICE. So obviously you're gonna have, the goal of this would be somewhat of a phone trace, some assistance. So this has actually happened before, which is why we know this thing. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the raids in Postville, Iowa. This was quite a while ago, but they came to the factory, they took all the parents, the kids got out of school, and there was nobody there. So, research and add your emergency contact list, the number of an immigration attorney should you need legal advice or representation. Once again, we are always available to call. We will refer out the best as we can if there is a detainment, but I would highly suggest that you seek an attorney who specializes in that. If you have US-born children, make sure they have passports and register their birth with your home country's consulate. So in the event, let's say that the parents are both deported and they decide that the children are gonna come with them, it'll facilitate that much easier. That would not be the best case scenario, but it has happened. And I'm sure you've seen in the news, a lot of people have chosen to self-deport. They have actually taken that option. Complete paperwork to appoint a new guardian for your children in the event of enforcement action and communicate said designation with the necessary individuals. Make copies of the paperwork and keep for your records with other important gathered documents. So that moves us on to, and I do not have an example of it, but there are forms out there where you can assign guardianship of your children to someone else if you are happened to be taken or deported. Typically, I would suggest anybody can fill those out. They do have to be notarized. So I would suggest consulting an attorney if you want to fill one of those out. And then the examples of the information list are passports, birth certificates, marriage license, any restraining orders you may have against anyone. Now that one is important because if you go back to the U visa or the VAWA, things like that, this has happened to us. The lady that I mentioned that was taken outside of court, we have helped her to file a U visa application to hopefully stay off her deportation. An A number in any immigration documents. Everybody's assigned an A number. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's an alien registration number. So anytime you apply for any kind of immigration benefit, you're given this number. It has no other real effect than being an identifying number. Documents demonstrating residence in the US and the amount of time you've been present. Driver's license if you have one. Social security card, registry of birth, emergency contacts. Children's medical information, that's a very important one, and any additional family-specific information. So it's a good idea to have these all prepared. Like I said, while we've still only seen targeted, we do not know what the future holds, and I would really suggest doing some of these to help in the event that that does happen. I went a little long, so I've only got about 10 minutes for questions.
And I've got the microphone, and I'm going to walk around the room. Ben, take a deep breath.
Okay. Like I said, I'm used to doing this in church basements.
If you have, I know you were going really fast at the end. Ellen, would you mind standing up and if you have a question, just raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you.
This is a little bit of a techie question, but the judicial warrant, does that have to be from the federal court jurisdiction that you reside in or where you're located?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so if you don't have one in this area from the Western District?
I don't. That's just the copy that we have on here.
No,
So.
but I mean, that's what you would have.
Yeah.
To be a valid warrant, it would have to be from the right jurisdiction as well.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Coming at you. Do you want to stand up, John?
When you recommend not opening your door, does opening your door mean they can come in? I mean, because most people are going to open their door, talk to whatever. I would assume you opening your door doesn't allow them to come into your threshold.
Correct. I would recommend not opening the door. I would have them slide that warrant underneath the door or hold it up to a window. Because it's just like in criminal proceedings too, they can, if they observe something, so let's say they open the door and there's drugs on the table, well, that can give them probable cause to enter at that point.
Just wondering if you have observed any pushback on all of this madness from the business communities.
I would say specifically not me. I do know a lot of businesses are not happy with this, and I can't name any specifically, but I can say what we've seen is a lot of them have buttoned up shop's a good way to say it. So they have lawyers on speed dial in case somebody were to come and look for these people, and they have locked their gates when they used to have more open access, things like that.
You've talked about this organization running off of funds. I'm wondering if you could tell us people who are trying to follow the right channels, like the DACA recipients or people on green cards, how often do they have to go back in and get those renewed, and how much does it cost?
So for deferred action, it is every 2 years, and right now they have it split. They're really doing an online push to reduce paper. So if I remember correctly, online is 555, and I believe that paper is 605, and that is every 2 years. Green cards are every 10 years. I don't remember what the exact price of that is. I used to have these all memorized, and they updated in April, and apparently I cannot keep up with it. So they used to have it listed by form as well. Now on the website, they have a specific section where you put in the form you want, and it will tell you how much you have to pay. But I'm pretty sure it's $1,000? Yeah, I think it's around $1,000. They do have green in them still, but yeah. No, those are the employment authorizations.
I have another question back here.
I understand you're discussing the legal aspects of a lot of these things, but on the economic side, with immigrants being picked up basically in the big cities, but it's got to be working its way down. It's got to be affecting the economy overall, what is happening just by the virtue of what is happening. Do you have any feedback at all as to, I know we don't have records right now as to how the economy is going. They kind of stopped counting a couple months ago, but are there signs? Do we see things getting a little worse in the economy? Or
I mean,
or not?
It's like you said, it's hard to say. I do think that, yes, we are seeing some signs of that, but you'll notice a lot of times that they're staying away from certain sectors. I was just having a discussion with this about the table about the bread basket. So out in the California area, they have what's called the bread basket, where they do all the like agricultural work, where they have tons and tons of undocumented workers. You don't hear a lot about them going to these institutions because they keep prices low. So I cannot confirm this, but I believe they kind of turn a blind eye to that so that they can keep that continuing.
Hang on, John, coming at you.
A few years ago, talking with a local dairy farmer who assured me there is not a single dairy farm in the state of Wisconsin that is not dependent on immigrant labor. And you talked about them starting at the large population centers and working their way down. I mean, can you envision at some point they will be going rurally through the county?
I can see that happening. I would hope it doesn't. If with all this money for the increased enforcement, increased officers, eventually I believe they're going to run out of places to go in urban areas. So could it happen? Yes. Will it happen? It's still to be seen.
Here we go, Ann.
I was thinking about the huge increase in the ICE budget, and I have two different questions. One is, how much of that money is going into either, the people they're hiring to enforce, the guys with the funny collars up over their nose, or detention centers, which I sort of understand as a growth industry, versus the people who are in the offices processing the paperwork. And then the other question is, what kind of training are any of these newly acquired people getting?
That's a great question because I actually keep an eye on the hiring practices of USCIS. I have for years, kind of see where trends are going. So recently, I believe it was a couple of months ago, they have, I am not 100% sure if it's a new position or if it's an extension to an existing position of an officer, where they are calling them Homeland Defenders. So traditionally, when you are a USCIS officer, you have to have a bachelor's degree in certain fields and things like that. They have stripped away most of those requirements for these things. So basically, if you are willing to learn and do this, you have a shot at being hired. Now, from our perspective, that is a very dangerous thing. Everything we do is based in law and policy. And we're having people who are going to be coming in and have just freshly learned about law and policy and are going to have no idea what they're doing. So we think that that is going to make our job significantly harder in the future. So even if we are right, if they misinterpret what is said in the law or misinterpret what we have in an application, that could result in like applications being returned or denied when they should not be. So to answer that question, that's the difference I'm seeing in employment at the USCIS level. At the federal level, or the ICE levels, I don't know what the allocation is of funds to each. But I do know we're gonna see more border installations, more detention facilities, and more officers. Did that fully answer all your questions?
Was there another question up in front? I'm coming at you anyway.
I don't know what the stats are, the percentage, but I've read a lot of articles where people are self-deporting and it was a slaughterhouse or something that lost 70% of their workforce, or there's rotting fruit on the trees. People are getting out. They don't want to be separated from their families. So you said 19% of the population or the workforce is immigrants,
Yes.
whether they're legal or, there are a lot of visas and things, and they try to do that. But if we did lose all of that, we would, and maybe that will be a backfire thing, that this will work in our favor. And Trump did say that he was going to help the farmers or something, whether
Right.
that actually happened or not. So that's my.
Yeah, the way I've had it put to me, which I hope is not the case, but is very likely, is that we are all gonna have to start feeling some pain before things change. So we're gonna have to personally feel it with rising prices, lack of products, things like that, until we're like, okay, so this is not a good idea.
Yeah. We're going to take one more question because we're at our time, but I think if Ben can stay around afterwards, we can certainly keep the conversation going without a microphone in front of my face. But we have one more question back here. Sure.
Hello, not a question so much as just an observation. I'm one of the members of the La Crosse Welcome Circle, and 3 years ago, just about today, actually on the 20th, 10th of November, we welcomed families from Ukraine. And I'm happy to tell you in one way, we're having a Thanksgiving dinner next week, an early Thanksgiving dinner, and we will be celebrating with 4 of the families who are still in La Crosse. But I have to tell you too, what their experience was when they first arrived 3 years ago. English was a terrible barrier for them, not speaking English, that is. So the county administered benefits to them until they were able to get employment. They all gained employment. All the adults are employed now, and they only received the benefits as long as they needed to. But they were this authorization to work was part of the Uniting for Ukraine program. Last month, or about 2 months ago, one of the individuals' employment authorization ran out, and it could not be renewed because they're not renewing them now. And so she had to stop her full-time employment. Ron Johnson went to bat for her, and she did get it renewed, but it took intervention intervention to get that renewed. The others, their employment authorization is going to run out at different times. But the one I know of has got another 8 months on hers, and then it will expire. And she'll have to choose to, if it doesn't get reauthorized, she'll have to go and leave the country. She can't work illegally. None of them have broken the law. None of them have done anything that's illegal. They're all here legally. But we did have to sit down and have the conversation, unfortunately, with the parents, how to educate their kids, what to do, and how to carry the telephone numbers of who would be the right person to call. How, the whole checklist that you went over, we had to sit down and go over that with them. And it was very, very painful, and I can tell you it was total silence. You know, they couldn't believe that they had to deal with the possibility that some of these things could happen to them. 3 of the families right now, the men are truck drivers, and there's new regulation now on truck drivers that they can be stopped and in a rather subjective way determine whether they speak English well enough to be driving a truck. And I don't know all of the details of that legislation right now, but I know that truck drivers can be stopped. And it's very intimidating. So far, none of our truck drivers have been stopped, but they could be. And their English is variable. And so if somebody chooses to challenge their ability to speak English, they could lose their ability to drive truck and lose their employment. So I'm just being witness to the fact that right now, everything's okay. 3 of the households have left the country and didn't stay, self-deported in a sense, but they weren't calling it that. They just knew that they could find other opportunities in Europe and left the United States. But there are 4 families in La Crosse right now waiting to see how things are going to go. So thanks. I just wanted to give that update.
Thanks very much, Jan. I was hoping that, you know, because I know that we do have people in the room who work with these communities, who work with these people, and you do bring a very personal perspective to this. I think, Anne, did you and Jane want to add some comments or anything about how we become or be better neighbors and advocates to people in our community who are immigrants? Or is that something that will be afterwards on our website, maybe? Okay, good. We will look for it on our website. I also just want to point out to our members that I think in our most recent newsletter from our state office, there is legislation relating to immigration changes and I think some of the local cooperation with detention facilities that is being proposed now, and there's position statements and urges to contact your legislators about these proposals. So feel free to go back to your newsletter or go back to our website or the state website for legislative advocacy suggestions. And I'm sure there are sample messages and letters and rationale for why the league is taking the position on these proposals that they are. Anybody else want to pipe up? This has been very, very enlightening. Oh, here we have a. They're here at the front table. So yes, the cards that Ben brought and mentioned in his are up at the front table. So please do take them. Ben, thank you very much. Can we just have a round of applause? Thank you very much for being with us today.